This morning we're talking about Revelation chapter 11. Now as we go through the book of Revelation, you might notice sometimes Revelation is a little difficult to understand, right? We have to kind of unpack it. Now this chapter in particular, there's a lot going on. And it's going to seem like, if you take it out of context, there's two completely unrelated things happening in this chapter. We're going to talk about both of them. And if you just kind of skim read it and don't really take your time through it, you'll think, well, these two things aren't connected at all. These should have been two separate messages. Why are we talking about both of these? Well, they're in the same chapter, in the same place for a reason, and we're going to get to that. You're just going to have to really focus. What does the teacher say? Focus power? Something like that? You're going to have to really focus in on this chapter because there's a lot going on. Now, as I was writing this, sometime last week I think it was, I had opened this up by saying, I want you to imagine that a storm is coming. Funny how things work out like that. So, imagine that a storm is coming. And in particular, imagine that this is a much larger storm than what we actually are anticipating sometime next week. Imagine that this storm is the largest storm ever. You've never seen anything like it. You can't even fathom what's about to happen. You just know that it's really, really awful. It's just going to be awful. But the good news is that a bunker is being built. Some kind of place that you can go and you can be under protection. Anyone who wants protection from the storm can come into the bunker. But there's a few conditions. First, you have to acknowledge the one who made the bunker. You have to give thanks and appreciate the one who gave you this place of protection and the sacrifices that they made to do that. You have to admit that you can't save yourself, that you can't stay outside of the bunker and expect not to get swept up in the storm. You have to admit, yeah, I need help. There's some rules once you get inside of the bunker. Common sense rules, really. Don't kill each other. Don't steal from each other. Rules you'd say, I'm glad those rules are in there when I get in the bunker. I appreciate those. I don't plan on doing these things to anybody else, but I appreciate that they don't plan on doing them to me either. So there's some common sense rules. Meanwhile, as you're preparing to enter into the bunker, you notice outside the winds are starting to pick up. The trees are starting to bend over. Those of us that know that a storm is coming, we're running out into the streets. We're yelling to people, get inside the bunker. You're not going to survive on your own out there. That storm is going to tear you to pieces. Get inside where it's safe. Get inside with us. Life here is better. But the people on the outside, they have a variety of opinions and none of them involve going actually into the bunker. A lot of people just deny that a storm is even coming. They say, I don't believe it. They don't see the signs. They don't see the storm clouds. They don't feel that in the air, you know that you feel when you can feel rain is coming. You say, oh, this is going to be bad. I can feel it. Some of us, as we get older, we say, I can feel it in my bones. I know that storm is coming. Some people are bitter about it. Get inside the bunker. Well, how dare you tell me what to do? How dare you tell me how to live my life? Some people are nicer about it. But they say, I just don't believe in all this fairy tale nonsense about a storm. I don't agree with anything they're talking about. Meanwhile, out near the door of the bunker, preparations are nearly complete. Time is running out. And the one who built the bunker sends someone else out there instead to go out there and measure the bunker. Make sure everything is right for the protection of those inside. So this man goes out and he's measuring the bunker. Now outside of the front door there's a lovely courtyard. Beautiful. There's trees planted. There's flowers. There's even a little cobblestone. I don't know about you. I really like little pretty cobblestone and stuff like that. It's a really beautiful and nice place to be. You might sit out there with some friends, eat lunch, whatever. And you see the man that was going out and measuring the bunker. He comes out there with his tools to measure the courtyard. But then you hear a voice come from the bunker, the one who built the bunker, that tells the man, don't even bother. Don't even bother measuring the courtyard to protect those that are in it. Because you see, all of this is going to be gone. The trees are going to blow up. All of the flowers, even these stones down in the cobblestone, all the little pretty statues and garden gnomes or whatever, all that's going to be gone. Don't bother measuring the outer courtyard. You see, those are for the people who are just observing. They sit outside in the courtyard and observe what happens inside the bunker. But we're not even worrying about the protection of the courtyard, because it's not going to be there anymore. There will be no courtyard after the storm comes. Can you imagine a storm so fierce that even the rocks of the ground are turned over? They're gone. So the man rolls up his tape measure. He lowers his head. He starts trudging back to the bunker. Turns around and looks one more time at the people who are out in the courtyard. Shakes his head and goes aside. And behind him, the door closes. A big, heavy door. And the people that are inside the bunker, their hearts sink to think about those who are outside, because once that door is closed, it's not opening again. There's no doggy door where you can come back and forth. There's no revolving door. It's shut. It's meant to be shut until this all blows over. And so the people on the inside, they think about those that are on the outside, their hearts sink. But then, as that door closes and the storm starts to come, the people on the outside, their hearts sink to realize, oh, this is for real. This wasn't just a fairy tale. This isn't something that I could just ignore until the last possible moment. The storm's on us, and I didn't take preparation. I didn't acknowledge the one who tried to give me safety. I thought I could save myself. I thought I could be good enough, I could be smart enough, I could put together all my preparations. And so now here I am, and with that thud of the door comes the thud in their heart to realize, oh, it's too late. I could have been saved. Now, as we go through that metaphor, I might have changed things a little bit to talk about a storm and a bunker. But I hope that the imagery there is very similar to what we're going to talk about in Revelation 11, because there's some similar concepts we're going to talk about. In Revelation chapter 11, the first couple verses. Now, this is John the Revelator who is talking. He's receiving a revelation from Jesus Christ, passed on from Jesus through angels, and this is what he says. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshippers. But exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. Now, in apocalyptic literature, which I realize not many of us are well versed in the intricacies of apocalyptic literature of thousands of years ago, but in apocalyptic literature, there were certain themes. We've talked about how if you're watching a movie and this really suspenseful music comes on, you know that someone's going to jump around the corner or something's going to happen. Musical cues in movies will give things away. Sometimes the lighting, you say, oh, something's sketchy about this place, something bad's going to happen. Well, in apocalyptic literature, there were little hints given too. And if you were measuring something, it meant you wanted to protect whatever is inside of that measurement. So the temple, where God's people are, is being protected. Bad things are about to happen in Revelation. Bad things already are happening, but it's about to get so much worse. It's pretty appalling if you go through the 7 trumpets, for instance. You see the first 6 trumpets, you say, oh, this is as bad as it's going to get. And then what happens? That angel stands 1 foot on the water, 1 foot on the land, and says, the 7th one's going to happen, we're not going to delay anymore, and it's about to get worse. You know, how could it get any worse? And we talked about the 7 thunders, where bad things are proclaimed. John's about to write it down, and God says, don't even write it down. All these things are unveiled to us in Revelation, all these awful things to come. But with the 7 thunders, there's a hint that maybe, just maybe, they're so bad we can't even read about them. That God's people are protected not only from the bad events that are going to happen, but some of those events we're protected from even knowing about. They're that bad. That's one way of looking at it. There could be several things going on there. Some believe that we're being protected from even the knowledge of how awful and horrific these things are going to be. So, getting back to Revelation 11 specifically, if something is measured, then you want to protect what's inside. So God's people inside the temple and those that are on the outside are not under God's protection. But they have the opportunity. They have the opportunity to come into the temple and to come under that protection, but they rejected it. Now we know, as we mentioned Gentiles here, I don't want this to be confusing to us, we know that Jesus died on the cross. And that when Jesus died on the cross, the temple veil was torn, meaning there was not that separation between us and God any longer. And we know from Paul's writings that in Christ there is neither a Jew nor Gentile. We know that in Christ our former divisions are gone, that we can all be children of God. So as we read about here about the Gentiles, I don't want you to think, oh, this means only the Jewish people are going to be protected, not us that didn't grow up in a Jewish bloodline. That's not what it's talking about. It's using some language that's familiar to convey the concept that you're either in or you're out. It kind of boils down to that. You're either in or you're out. You're either in God's family or you're out. But you can choose to be part of God's family. You can accept his sacrifice on the cross for your sins. You can come into the temple, or like we said a minute ago, it's like a bunker before the storm. You can come into his family. You can be in that temple. You can be under God's protection. It doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen in the world, but it means that in those final days, you're under God's protection, that you are in his temple, that you are part of his family, that a lot of these bad things happen, and we will probably deal with some ramifications in the end days of bad things happening in the world, but it won't be nearly as bad for us as it is for those who have completely rejected God. Regardless of when Jesus takes us up at the last days, does he do it at the beginning, does he do it in the middle, however God takes us up is not really the point. We focus a lot on a timetable. We'd love to have everything on a calendar and say, Jesus is going to return on this date, and this is going to happen, this is going to happen on these dates. It's less about trying to box in God to a schedule that works for us. It's more about knowing that when Jesus returns, when he brings his children home into heaven, you want to be in that number. When all of these awful things happen to those who have rejected God, you want to be in the camp that has embraced God. Not that we're perfect, but that we trust God to be our Lord and Savior. Not just that we believe in God. Yeah, I know that he died on the cross. The devil and the demons know that. But that we trust God to be in charge of our life. Not that we're perfect, but that we make that conscious decision, say, God, I trust you, I get in the bunker with you. I might mess up when I'm in the bunker, I might say or do something I shouldn't do, but I say, I want to be in there with you though. I want to be under God's protection, I want to accept his sacrifice, I want to let him make me better day by day. Constantly a work in progress. But I certainly don't want to try to be a work in progress, get me some self-help books and try to make myself a better man on the outside of God's protection. It's not going to happen. When people would have identified with the imagery that's in here, they would have known what this meant. It's not about Jews and Gentiles, it's about in or out. You're either in God's family or you're out. It's not about your bloodline. It's not about who your mama was, your daddy was. It doesn't matter. If your family went to church for the last 10, 20, 30 years, that doesn't mean that you're in the temple with God's people. That you have to make that commitment yourself. You have to be part of God's family willingly. To say, I want to be part of his family. There's going to be chaos. Even in the holy city, as we go through this chapter, we see even in the holy city. And truth be told, we see that today, don't we? Look at Israel. Look at Jerusalem. Look at all of the chaos that is going on there. So when it says Gentiles, there's a bunch of interpretations of what that means. But to boil it down very simply, because I don't want us to go get lost in the weeds here. To boil it down very simply, there will be people who are not part of the family of God who will trample his holy city. And as awful as that is, will be under his protection whenever that does happen. So, you're either in or you're out. But before that happens, we as the people of God should be those who are going out before the storm and warning people. We should be saying everything we can, doing everything we can to bring people into God's protection, to be part of that family of God. That is urgent. If you can feel it in the air, and sometimes things happen in the news, and just like you can feel a storm coming. Can't you sometimes, when you see certain things happen, you kind of feel that chill come over you and go, oh, it's a little bit closer than I thought. I don't know when Jesus returns. I don't know when this tribulation officially begins. All of these signs and all the plagues and all of the awful things we know are going to happen in Revelation, I don't know exactly when that happens. Not that we're meant to know a start date. That's beside the point. Jesus even said that when he was on earth, he didn't know exactly when the day or the hour would come, but just to always be ready. If we knew with the day or the hour, I really think if we knew it was going to happen in 2041 on a Thursday, we'd probably say, I can do whatever I want to till 2041. I'm not going to follow God. I'm just going to wait till about 2040 and I'm going to get my life right. If we knew we had that much time. But I think Jesus leaves it ambiguous, leaves it a mystery on purpose. To be on fire for God now. To be one of his people now. and to live in his way now. We're not promised tomorrow. I don't know how many of us are going to make it to 2040. That's kind of a ways away. Like we said earlier, just a few weeks ago, there was a car accident outside on the way to church. That could have been one of us. We don't know. We're not guaranteed. You can be doing everything right, read your Bible, praising God, praying to God. You can be on your way to church. That could be any of us. We're not promised tomorrow. We don't know that we've got that much time to say, well, I'll just wait until later. We will be under God's protection now, whenever that storm does come. And especially as we see the signs, as we feel it in our soul, that the days are getting closer. The days are getting closer. So we should, if we care about people, we should be saying, even though it might make me uncomfortable, I need to talk to them. Even if it might put me outside of my comfort zone, I need to know that they trust in Jesus. It might be an uncomfortable conversation, but I need to know that they trust in Jesus for their salvation, not in themselves. Not in, I'm a good enough person, but they trust in Jesus to get them there. There's really no going back. I know it's a popular opinion of, well, when I die, Jesus will give me the option, and I'll just choose it. It's too late. It's too late. I think about here in Revelation 11, that imagine that bunker had windows, and you're standing out in the courtyard, and you're looking at all those that are feasting around the table of God, and you're on the outside of it, they run away. Jesus told his disciples in Luke 17, verses 26 through 27, that in those days, meaning the end times, that it will be as it was in the days of Noah. So if you want to understand a little bit more about what's happening in Revelation from the book of the Bible outside of Revelation, you can look at Luke 17. We can look at passages in Matthew, but there's a lot of different passages we can look at. The best way to interpret the Bible is through the Bible, right? We can have all of our opinions, but when we look at God's Word, what does God's Word say about God's Word? So it says here that the people are going to be going about their business, oblivious that this is about to happen. That they'll be doing everything they would normally do, completely oblivious, even though there's been warnings. Even though we say that the storm is coming, it's about to happen, it's upon us, they can feel it in the air. And people will say, I don't believe in those fairy tales. Or even if they do believe, they say, well, I'm just going to do this on my own. People will willingly reject God, people will unknowingly reject God, but it's constantly going to be this rejection of God. And Jesus goes on to speak about those who will be taken and those who will be left behind. That there will be people who are taken up to be with him, and then people who aren't, that will still be left behind, that will have to deal with all of the repercussions of living in a world that is falling apart, but without the protection of God. And again, we're not going to focus on exactly when Jesus comes and takes us back. The point is, he's going to come and take us back. If God tells you in his word says the world is about to be just destroyed by fire and all of these awful things are going to happen, the correct response isn't, well, when? Can it happen on a Tuesday? How much time? The correct response is, can I be there with you? Can I be in your camp? Can I be in your family? So when we look at what else happened in the days of Noah, for a little bit of context, we see God's people, in a very small number, we have Noah and a few people from his family, they get in, not a bunker, but an ark for a storm. And during that time, they rise above the destruction that happens underneath. Sounds a lot like the rapture, doesn't it? Where God takes his people up. So they are here in the midst of some destruction. I'm sure there is a time period before people drown where they're screaming and they're crying, and Noah's probably inside the ark and he hears this, he sees it, he can look out and see all of these things happen. Or at least hear probably some of that from inside the ark. Or even if you couldn't see it there, you couldn't hear it, you know it's happening. You know that your friends, your neighbors, all that's happening out there. So yes, there is destruction, there is all this awful thing that's going on that Noah and his family are aware of, but they are risen above it. God has protected them. He sealed them up and put his mark of protection on them. And you remember, if we read through, we're not going to read through Genesis 6 today, but if you kind of remember a little bit about the story of Noah and the ark, what happens before the ark is God gives him all these very specific instructions about how to build the ark, what kind of wood to use, and all of these measurements. And to me that sounds a lot like what happens in Revelation 11. Get out here with a measuring rod. I want you to measure this place of protection for God's people. So just as it was in the days of Noah, Noah's out here, he's measuring. He's measuring the dimensions of the ark. Now God never says to him, I want you to measure the stuff outside of the ark. No. He's measuring what's inside for the protection of the people outside. For the people, inside. He's measuring the inside of the ark, he's building the ark for the protection of the people inside. He's not measuring the rest of the world. He's not measuring the courtyard or some other place where people are going to go. You're either in or you're out. There's no ropes or ladders on the side of the ark. Think about any paintings you've seen, or when you were a kid, maybe you did those little toy arks and you had the little animals and everything. There was never a life preserver, was there? There was never a rope or a ladder, because you're either in or you're out. In Genesis 7:16, we see that God himself shuts the door of the ark. Once everybody's in, God shuts the door. And nobody's coming in or out until after that flood's over, right? I know we say that phrase, when God shuts the door, he opens a window, but not here. Not here. Once he shut that door, there's no opening a window, there's not any opening that door back, there's no coming and going. Now, at this point in Revelation 11, we move to a slightly different topic. And again, when I said this at the beginning, but you're going to see this and say, why did we go from talking about a bunker and a storm to talking about these two witnesses? How are these connected? I don't understand how you're connecting these passages. But trust me, these are related. You'll see why in a moment. So right after we have this image of the holy city of God being overrun by enemies of God, it's just being trampled upon, it's being mistreated, we see these two witnesses. There's a lot of speculation about who are these witnesses. We think they're biblical characters. That's beside the point. We can get to that later. But I want us, before we do any of that, to get to what God's Word actually says. So in Revelation chapter 11, starting in verse 3. And I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens, so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Now when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. At that very hour, there was a severe earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Now again, I know there's probably a dozen different messages we could preach out of this chapter. We're not going to cover all that. But there are a few things that I want us to unpack this morning from this. And the main part about these two witnesses, these two messengers that I want to talk about is this, that God tells them, God has told us in advance, this is something that has not yet happened. It talks in past tense because it's something that it's almost as like this happened, that John has witnessed it happen in this vision. But this is something that has not yet happened. And so we know what is going to happen. The messengers know what's going to happen. And basically God has told them, I want you to go out and preach to a world that is not going to be receptive to your message. I want you to go out there and you're going to preach until the preaching is done. You're going to preach the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And at the end of it, they're going to kill you. And the messengers are going to say, okay, let's go. And they're going to willingly be a light in the dark. And that's what we're called to do, is to be a light in the dark. They're going into a situation, particularly, some of us believe that this is Moses and Elijah. The scripture does not tell us that. We don't want to assume more than the scripture says. But given what happened with the transfiguration of Jesus with Moses and Elijah earlier, we think that's probably who this is. So you think about Moses and Elijah, that they had already been through quite a lot, right? You think about some of their stories, and here they are coming for round 2. They're going to be killed at the end of their message. and they're going to go do it. They're going to go preach to people who do not receive them. They're going to willingly do this. And just imagine, this part just blows my mind every time I read it. And I know I shouldn't be surprised by it being in God's Word, because I've read this over and over again, but it still surprises me every time, that people exchange gifts. Can you imagine at your funeral, people come to your funeral not to mourn your death, but to celebrate, I'm glad they're dead. Let's exchange gifts. Let's sing songs and dance. We'll make some Hallmark specials or some kind of specials on TV to celebrate. Hey, you remember the day that they died? Isn't that great? Can you imagine that at your funeral? But it's even worse, because these people don't even get funerals. They're laid out on the street. They're laid out on the street for people to come by, look at them, probably spit on them. From every people, tribe, nation to come by and probably gloat, say, we got it. These people were preaching about God, we didn't want to hear about it. So we're just going to come by and look at them and laugh at them, probably draw on their face, throw stuff at them, spit on them, call them names, celebrate. They give each other gifts. I just can't imagine. I think about when you go into like Hallmark at Christmas time, and there's little ornaments. I mean, where people will make little ornaments or something. Let's celebrate the day. And they're celebrating God's prophets being killed. And this is what they're going into. Say, I know what's going to happen. I'm sure if God told us in His Word, He's going to tell them too when they go out that this is exactly what's going to happen. Okay, let's go. And they're going to be a light in a very, very, very dark world. We said that these two concepts, what happens with being in the temple under God's protection and what happens to these two witnesses, are connected, even though they may seem like completely separate stories. And here's where it connects. If most people are not going to receive the message from these two witnesses, who is the message for? Now, some of these people might hear and repent, but I tend to think that a lot of this, for who this is really going to impact, is us, right now. And whenever God calls us home, before He calls us home, maybe whatever Christians are on the earth in that time, however God works out His timing, regardless of when these things happen, I think we're meant to know about this. I think we're meant to know that this is going to happen. And we're supposed to be inspired by it. That here comes God's messengers, being a light in the dark, undergoing all of that stuff, because a storm is coming. And we have the awesome privilege of being a witness, being a messenger. Not in the same way that these two witnesses are, but with a whole lot less to worry about, right? For most parts of the world, I dare say, you could go out and tell your friends, your family, your coworkers about Jesus, and you're not going to be killed like this. You're not going to be displayed dead in the public square. Some countries are hostile to the gospel, and that is a reality. That is a thing that happens today. For here in America, we've been very blessed. God has given us that freedom, and we have soldiers who protect those kind of freedoms. We're very blessed that we don't have to worry about that. You can tell people the good news. You can prepare people for the storm that is to come, and do so in love, but not worry about those kind of repercussions. The worst we might encounter is it was a little bit awkward. It was a little bit uncomfortable. I didn't want to talk to them about it. Particularly, I didn't like that person anyway. I don't know if I want them in heaven with me. We might be a little uncomfortable, but we don't have to worry about those kind of things. We are called, well, what did we say during children's sermon? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Not hide it, but to be a light in the darkness. Now, exactly 1 month from today, Kay Turner, our very own Kay Turner, is going to be going to Cambodia. She's mentioned some of the different cultural things that you have to encounter there, some of the things that happen. Not that she's necessarily directly having to encounter, but they do happen in that country. There's a large Buddhist influence that is there. And it turns out, Kay mentioned to me that Christianity is not the only group that's sending missionaries to Cambodia. That there are other groups who will call themselves Christians, but are actually a different religion, that will send missionaries there. And how confusing it must be as a missionary to go to another country. And there are people who say, oh, I know about Jesus. These other people told me, and they have a completely warped worldview. Because someone told them something about Jesus that wasn't right. And now as a missionary, you've got to come behind and say, that's not actually the truth. Let's look at what God says in His Word. And then have to do a little bit of not only exposing them to Jesus for the first time, but correcting some false gospel that they've been presented. So Kay stands as an example to us of being a light in the darkness and going out into the world. And not all of us are called to go out into the mission field in another country, but you may be called into the mission field with Compassion Cafe, serving a meal to those who are hungry every month, just down the road in Nashville. You might be called to do a local mission through Enjoy, or going to the Boys and Girls Club and participating in that. You may be called to give financially. We had a wonderful fundraiser the other day, and I forget the exact dollar amount, but well over $1,000 that was raised for sending Kay to Cambodia. So there are many ways that we can give to missions, and giving is important. Giving financially is very important. We're also called to pray, and we're called to whatever mission God calls us to, whether it's around the world or around the block, to be willing to go, to not stop, to start on our knees for certain and pray, but to not stop there, but to get up and to go, to tell the good news, and regardless of what may be out there, to be a light in the dark. So the end is coming soon. We don't know the day or the hour. We're not meant to. I wish I could lay out for you in Revelation a timetable. I started to do that. I had a great chart from David Jeremiah, if you want that. But I feel like the exact timetable is less important than knowing God is coming, be ready. I don't want us to go through these symbols and say, well, if these things start happening and I'm still on the earth, God hadn't called me home, then I'm going to look out here and say, well, this is the 6th trumpet. I got a little bit more. It's not about nailing down the time. It's not about figuring out exactly how much time you have. It's about you don't know, you'll never know how much time you have. You just want to be under God's protection as part of His family. When God shuts that door, as He did on the ark, as He will do at the temple, you want to be in God's family whenever the end of your life comes. Now, however God might be leading you during this time, He may be leading you to accept Him for the first time. As we've said, the devil and the demons know about Jesus. There's a real difference between knowing about Jesus versus saying, I want Him to be in charge of my life. I want to be saved by Him. I want to be part of His family. So there's a real difference between a knowledge of God and receiving God. Maybe you've accepted God, but you say, I need to get closer to Him. I've accepted God. I'm in that protection. I'm in the bunker, but I've been kind of perched up in the window. I've been kind of standing in the doorway. Remember what we said in Revelation 11. You're either in or you're out. There is no in between. You're serving God or you're not. And may we all serve Him more faithfully today. However the Lord leads, I'll be here if you'd like to pray, or if you want to pray down here, or if you want to talk to me after the service. However He leads you, won't you please come forward as God leads you during this final song.